And I want to thank everyone who came tonight. I appreciate it. I know this stuff is hard to do online, but I appreciate you all coming. And also, I want to thank Steve for screening this really wonderful film that I would not have seen without Steve screening it. And his whole architectural series is really excellent. And typically, Steve screens excellent movies, so be on, make sure that is on your radar because he has really good taste. um, and I just wanted to say that I hope you guys have watched this movie. It was so good, and it's so important, and I think it's important for two reasons. Um, uh, that's okay. This is like home, we're all home right now, so it's okay. Um, so I know who that is, and I know whose dog that is. Her name is Kelly. Kelly, calm down. So I just wanted to say, this movie is really important for non-architects to see because it highlights the achievements of some women architects and the contributions that they've made in history. And a lot of times the women's contributions are blotted out, especially in architectural history. I only learned mostly about white male architects when I went to school, and very few women were mentioned. And I think this movie, the way it portrays, the profound influence that these women had on the built environment is fantastic, and it's groundbreaking. It doesn't happen very often. So I hope that everyone saw it. And for architects, I think, especially for women architects, I got so much out of it. I was so inspired, and it was really neat to see the careers of women from when they got out of school all the way up to when they were in their 80s and 90s, and they're all still working, which is amazing. I was like, I want to be like that 90-year-old, it was truly inspiring, and just to see their ups and downs and their the hurdles that they faced, because we're all in the trenches. You'll hear, the women tonight on the panel. We're all in the trenches, facing problems, and everything that happens when you're an architect, and when you're a woman architect. All this stuff. It was just inspiring to see that, how these women overcame, how they were resilient, and how they lasted, and they didn't, they didn't quit. They just kept going, and being vocal and outspoken. So I was very, really inspired by that. And I, again, thank Steve for putting this movie out there. Um, with that, I'm going to introduce our fantastic panelists. They are very talented architects and contributors to our community here in Phoenix. So they're educators, and they are advocates for sustainability and social justice advocates, and they are fantastic people. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and if you guys, if when I introduce you, please like wave maybe so that they know which one is which. I know your names are there anyway, but anyway, you don't have to wave if you don't want. Okay, I'm going to start with Ashley. Um, our first panelist is Ashley Luton Mulhall. She is currently leading design performance and sustainability at Orcutt Winslow, and guides the firm with a goal of meeting the 2030 challenge, a commitment to a net zero energy portfolio by 2030. She manages a service line for Orcutt Winslow focused on high performance building science, energy, and sustainability consulting, as well as designing deep green projects. Working with each project team, Ashley coordinates the review and implementation of sustainability strategies and practices in order to ensure every project complies with the high standards of sustainability and efficiency held by various certifications nationally. And our next panelist is Kate Dudzik-Smith. Did you wave? Here's Kate. Kate Desick-Smith is the founder and principal architect of Volume and Void Architecture, focused on place and balance, based in Phoenix. She also teaches architecture at ASU, including an upcoming studio looking at creative, humane dwelling spaces called Homelessness Studio, Dwelling in a Desert City. Kate is active in advocacy for architects and architecture with a local AIA chapter. And last but not least is our panelist, Bree Smith. Bree Smith, Bree is a lecturer at the design school where she teaches core curricular courses on interior design and interior architecture programs. Recognized for innovative processes as often as final products, Bree is a licensed architect who strives to give all stakeholders a voice, placing collaboration, diversity, and missions at the forefront of every project. Away from the office, Bree is occasionally training for a triathlon or constructing much needed furniture. She serves on the board of Run Third Alliance, a nonprofit organization striving to empower youth through after-school running programs. And I just briefly wanted to say that Bree is also a leader in the AIA Women's Leadership Group. So I wanted to put that group out there for the audience. Obviously, it's for women, architects, or people in the design profession. So if you are interested at all in joining, contact any of us. I think you'll have Steve's email address. So if you need to get a hold of us, you can go through Steve. And another organization I wanted to mention is National Organization of Minority Architects. And I know some of you are already members of that wonderful organization, but I encourage everyone to join, everyone in the design profession. And it's open to everybody. You don't have to be a minority, so women are considered minorities as well. So consider joining. Okay. With that, I'm going to start the questions. And I'll have each panelist answer each question, and I'll just say your name, we'll rotate. So I'm going to start with the first question, which is, what did this movie mean to you? And let's start with Kate.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I found this movie very interesting because I actually hadn't heard of 3 of the women architects before. I heard of Denise Scott Brown and her work with Robert Venturi, but not the other 3. So it was really good to see so many accomplished, practitioners in our field, and get to know them a bit. Yeah, it's very important to me, particularly for ourselves, but also for the next generation, that we hear more stories and see more examples of women architects and the contributions they made. I mean, I wasn't actually aware that Le Corbusier did not design the top of the Cité Radieuse. And I looked at the Wikipedia page, and actually I've done a bit of research on all these women since, which has been delightful to do. But she's not mentioned, but other architects are mentioned in the Wikipedia page, including, Jean Prouvé, Charlotte Perron is mentioned, doing some of the, I think, like cabinetry and some of the other woodworking that's actually designed in those units. But yeah, so somebody in his office isn't necessarily credited then with helping out. So for me, it's also very indicative, of kind of like maybe an older way of thinking of things, where if you're from that office, you're not necessarily credited or mentioned. So I did find that interesting. But it's nice to hear the experiences of those women and have them documented.
Oh, for sure. What about you, Ashley?
Well, I agree with Kate that it was really nice to get to know all of those women architects a little bit better and spend some time. I felt really welcome watching the film. I kind of just felt like I was somehow participating in it, you know, like it was like I was almost standing in front of a mirror in some ways, you know, just hearing their stories. Not to say that I'm like as good as them, but just, you know, their experiences really resonated is what I'm trying to say. And, you know, I think it gave me a deeper understanding of my own practice of architecture and how it's evolving, and sort of, you know, being able to sort of place myself a little bit in their timelines of, you know, sort of being able to look forward and understand, you know, where my career might be taking me in the next 10 or 20 or 30 years. And just to see it as a journey. I think so often we get stuck in the day-to-day grind of, you know, doing the job, that we don't take a step back and understand it as a whole. So it was, I think, really beautiful and touching to see that entire journey, you know, of those 4 women, and also just all the similarities that, you know, I think because their 4 stories, you know, were paralleled in a lot of ways. You know, they got to a point in their career where they were just like enough people, like each of them in their own ways was just like, you know, just exploded out of the oppression that they were facing. And, you know, grew from that. And, you know, it was really just interesting to see all those stories together.
Right. What about you, Bree?
It was hopeful. I mean, even kind of looking back and looking at the past, there's, you know, I'm sitting at ASU right now, or if you look around, the makeup of the student body is completely different. And in fact, in some cohorts, we have more women than men. And the diversity at the school is a lot better. And I'm excited for this next generation that's kind of coming up and coming into the profession. On the same token, some of the challenges don't seem to have changed much. So for me with this movie, the themes that resonated most were that there's a strong sense of social obligation, or wanting to commit to their communities, wanting to make their communities better through and using kind of their skill set and their collaborations to be able to do that. And that they did collaborate. All of them talked about the teams that they worked on, you know, the other professionals, the people that they learned from. And so even though they're kind of top of their field and were, as they were coming up, they were still sort of humble and had a sense of humor about the systems that they were facing, but also kind of a humor and joy in what they were able to accomplish. And so for me, that, you know, I have that hope for the students coming up, and I have that hope that we can kind of reflect on where we are now, and again, kind of actually look at the journey and see how we can find joy in what we do.
Yeah, I did see a lot of joy in those architects. They were, yeah. So, is there a particular story in the movie that resonated with your own experience in architecture? Let's start with Ashley this time.
I'm so glad I get to go first on this one. So there's a point in the movie where Denise Scott Brown is talking about her first day of architecture school. And she said she walks into the room, you know, her understanding was that architecture was a profession for women. And she walks into, you know, her first day of class, and she's the only woman in the room. And she's like, where are all the women? And that really resonated for me. My mom loves to remind me of this story, but when I was in orientation for architecture school, I sat behind this young man who obviously had no clue what was going on, but I remember him turning around and telling me that I was in the wrong room because I was, you know, because architecture was for men. And it was like, what on earth are you talking about? I mean, I just sort of gave this guy a piece of my mind. And my mom was there with me, and she said, I will never forget, you know, it's
Well
her
done.
favorite story. So yeah, that one really resonated with me. And, you know, obviously Denise Scott Brown and I did not go to architecture school in the same decade. far from it. And, you know, those kinds of situations were still happening. That was 1998. So, you know, I hope that by this time, most kids entering college are a little bit more open-minded, but it just sort of reminded me, you know, just how far I've come in, you know, even in my beginning of architecture school, I was pretty convinced that I was meant to be there. So I loved that story.
Yeah, that was a great story. She was like, what are all the men doing here?
Yeah.
um, uh, um, what did you think? What resonated most with you?
So Denise Scott Brown wrote a story about that she's been doing architecture for 83 or for 85 years at the point that this movie was filmed, and describes sort of laying on her parents' bed and watching the sun as it crept across the wall and kind of shadow play. And I mean, I think we each, and this is where I get excited, you know, we each have so different experiences and different voices and moments in our lives that resonate for one reason or another. And we all kind of have this muscle memory of how we engage with our built environment that starts us on this profession and starts us in this career well before we sit down at university, well before we're in front of a drafting program. And all of that kind of richness comes into, or could and can come into how we design. And so I think that in conjunction with these really strong themes of mentorship, all of them said, Jackie, let's see, I wrote it down. Jackie Turwitt, who I wasn't familiar with, so she just sat me down and told me what to do and put me in here. And these women just kind of put me here and told me where to go. And that how being able to kind of empower one another and sort of celebrate those voices and celebrate our unique experiences to create and be able to design more dynamic futures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. What resonated with you?
Particularly, well, everything what everybody else has been saying, first of all, because I think that there is, when we start off very young, I think we all, every architect I know, male or female, usually says, oh, I knew when I was little, like I played with blocks or I played with Legos. And I think that that the movie really, all these women seem to start very young, whether they were, drawing first or, they're going to, Le Corbusier studio to just sit and, see if
work
they'll
for
get
free.
hired. Yeah, exactly. Work for free. It resonated with me just so much, just the camaraderie that they all did seem to have, and the relationships that they made that were so important. And I know that, going through my career, the relationships, particularly that I make early on, like everyone just helps, and particularly other women, I think, it's been, very helpful to have, strong female friendships, to move through this profession, and just strong friendships in general. Talking about wanting to create spaces and places for everyone within a city, and looking at everything from playgrounds, to dwelling spaces and city parks, something that's really egalitarian, but also elevates the human experience. Really, you can see it in all of them, where they talk about, not only the design, but then also recognizing, like kind of learning from Las Vegas kind of thing, recognizing the everyday and the importance of the everyday. And that architecture is truly a collaboration. It was said before, but to me, that's everything, right? Architecture is very much about a team, and it's very much about coming together and collaborating. And it it seems like whether or not you're working for Le Corbusier studio and getting the plum job after being there for like a week, which is amazing, it is ultimately about, you know, that kind of collaboration and working together and, you know, making something lasting.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you brought up the playground. I loved that part of the movie where um, the Cornelia Oberlander, the landscape architect, I loved how she talked about, you know, when she had like 3 children in 3 years. I was like, oh my God, that sounds hard. Um, and how she used to take them onto the job site, and how, you know, she designed playgrounds, and sometimes she didn't, and they just played there, you know, with her on the job site. And I just thought that was a wonderful story, talking about the humanity of being an architect, you know, and the humanity of, like, yeah, you have kids, and, you know, women are still the primary caregivers. So just talking about how they, you know, they incorporated their families and their lives in and made it work. And I thought that was fantastic. Okay, next question. What are your thoughts on this year's Pritzker Prize winners, a 2-woman team, Yvonne Farrell and Shelley McNamara, and how it compares to the time that Denise Scott Brown was snubbed? Bree.
So I will start. A couple of years ago, the AIA National Conference was in Philadelphia, and Denise Scott Brown came.
Oh, wow.
And which kind of brought my attention, I think, to the women's leadership summits that have been happening every other year. And then with Denise Scott Brown being there, really learning about the history and how many different women, dynamic women, have been involved in this profession that don't have the face time and don't have the kind of fame that others have received. But Denise Scott Brown was there and was sort of signing books, and they honored her. And it was such a moment to have thousands of architects. I mean, everyone was just waiting for the standing ovation. People were just kind of eager to be able to show their gratitude and to be able to applaud her work and applaud her efforts. And it was pretty dynamic. You know, it's one of those, people were just kind of lining up to get a signature and to say hello. And it's exciting to see, one, that people are receiving in pairs, that you can be a team, because so much of what we do is often collaborative, and it's really difficult to kind of can't build and construct. You can if you're doing small residential, but if you're talking about kind of larger projects, you can't do it without a dynamic team of people. And so I'm glad that we're starting to kind of incorporate, to recognize these partnerships and collaborations, because I think it really talks to the kind of innovation and how firms are working together.
Yeah, very true. Kate, what did you think about that?
Well, I've worked for 3 different architect couples. So I know how closely they work, you know, and it's just part of the DNA of their relationship. You know, it's not that it turns off when it goes home, and you know, like it's, you know, it's like you consider them to be like a design unit. You know, they each have, you know, different facets, but ultimately they play off each other. They, you know, they, like, I don't know how you can separate them, you know, like it's really odd to me to recognize one half of the couple and not the other half, you know, particularly with how collaborative, you know, that unit is, and then also how collaborative our profession is. They did it again though, the Pritzker, I don't know if you guys know this, in 2012.
Wow.
They recognized, I'm trying to remember his name. They recognized a Chinese architect, but not his wife, who was also his collaborative partner. So it's really, and you know, considering that in 2001 it was Herzog and de Meuron,
Right.
and then like I just wonder why, you know. And then so I'm happy, but a little confounded where they seem to recognize like two business partners that are maybe partners in business only, but not necessarily the married couples that are both business partners and married couples. So I don't know what the criteria is, but honestly, like it does leave me wondering, you know, having had having worked for, you know, several couples now, I don't know how they can leave somebody out like that.
Well, and it's the woman they leave out. Can you imagine them giving an award to the woman of a couple, the woman part of the couple only, and not the males? That's never going to happen.
Like giving one to Billy Chen and not Todd Williams.
Right.
Awesome ending. That never happens though. So anyway,
Or
good
Elizabeth
points.
Diller.
Ashley,
Yeah.
right. Which, yeah, I would, yeah. Anyway, okay. Ashley, what do you think about?
You know, I agree with everything that's been said too. It's definitely nice to see women be recognized, but I am very worried about the future of women in our profession. Recently, because of this COVID-19, you know, just like pause that everyone's having to take. And I know, you know, this many women architects who have gotten laid off or left their jobs to take care of their kids, and they're not sure if or when they're going to come back. So I think you're going to see a big rift in the number of women architects because of this COVID-19 pause that we've all been taking, and the challenge of having kids at home who need an education. It just makes it so difficult. You know, before, when, you know, schools, institutions were in place, it was still very hard for women to, you know, keep their careers in architecture specifically because it's so demanding. Now it's, you know, just astronomically harder. So I'm really worried about the future of working moms in architecture. You know, that you know, we can all sort of persevere through this. It's just unprecedented what's happened. So
For sure. Can you just tell us a little bit about your own personal experiences with this? Like,
oh sure, yeah. You know, when the stay-at-home orders came in March, you know, my husband and I were both working from home. The first day was utter chaos because, you know, our kids couldn't go to their daycare. And, you know, at the time, my oldest wasn't even 5 yet. So 2 kids under 5 who are craving constant attention, and neither of us wants to give them any because we're trying to work, you know,
Yeah.
8 to 5. And, you know, basically within 2 days, we said, okay, we need a system. So we basically just started splitting our work days. And so neither of us were really able to work full time until daycare reopened and they could go back to school. So I really, you know, my oldest is starting kindergarten. He's not going to be able to go to school for 8 weeks. We're still trying to work through that, you know, and, you know, sort of put on this facade of availability. You know, we're like, I'm not really available to work and I'm not really available to my kids. I'm, you know, sort of stuck between the two constantly. I mean, I'm not happy. No one's happy. You know, nobody involved is happy with the situation. But the reality is so many families are in the same situation that we're all just kind of, you know, being supportive, but, you know, long term, this stay at home for kids just can't persist. And, you know, I know that there's so much politics involved in the decision to bring kids back to school, but it's so unhealthy for kids to not be in school. It obviously, I think the biggest risk of exposure for teachers is other teachers. That's really the teachers I talk to, they're mostly worried about their exposure to each other. So, you know, there's no good answer. There really isn't. And we're all just kind of stuck waiting this thing out. It's been just a huge strain for everyone. I mean, my kids were depressed because they couldn't see their friends. You know, they're so little. I mean, you just sort of, your heart breaks.
Yeah.
So, you know, and the situation's just been terrible. And I can see it having a real lasting effect on, you know, not just architecture as a profession, but because it's so demanding time-wise, that, you know, it's really hard to do this job if you can't be committed. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Has like, you know, there been any accommodations? Like,
Oh, definitely. Yeah. You know, work has been great in, you know, allowing me to only work 25 hours a week for 12 weeks or whatever that was. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to reduce my hours again once school starts. But, you know, school starting in a week,
yeah.
I don't even know what that's going to look like. No one, you know, I have no idea how much time they're going to be expecting a kindergartner to virtually learn. So, I mean, it was just this crazy time, you know, where, you know, that whole family structure and support structure of the community is really broken right now because, you know, all the institutions that we rely on are not open. So, and I don't think anybody really predicted, you know, this kind of collapse in working professionals that's imminent with kids school. So it's
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent points. That, yeah. I didn't realize this makes sense. It's kind of scary, like you're saying, what the impact will be on women because they will likely take on, a lot of them will take on the burden of taking care of the kids and will have to reduce hours or
right.
quit or take a leave of absence. And that is scary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I think the profession is being very supportive, but you know, it's sort of inevitable that we're going to lose a lot of really talented women
Not
over the
sustainable,
next
right?
year. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, also, you know, typically because of the gender pay gap, women are the ones that make less. So usually in a family decision, it's the person who makes less that, you know, leaves their jobs to do a lot of like the home care, or, you know, whether it's kids or whether it's, you know, a parent that's sick or ill or needs care, because, you know, some people I know who have pulled their parents out of care and are taking care of them as well. So
I will say, you know, my husband and I are both architects. So, you know, we share a lot of the burdens pretty much equally, which is atypical. But I would say there are sometimes higher expectations for commitment to their jobs to men. You know, that women kind of, because of the expectation that you are the one responsible for child rearing, you know, you kind of get a little bit more flexibility. But you know, my husband works in an office with all men.
Mm-hmm.
You know, no one in his position is a woman, and he has to really fight for dad's rights, you know, to be flexible because those expectations are just not there in the workplace. So, you know, I think it's not just a women's problem, it's everyone's problem. But you're right, women do take the majority of the burden most of the time, but it's interesting to see the other side of it too.
Mm-hmm. Bree, have you, I know you just had a baby 3 months ago. Have you felt, or like, what are some of the challenges you're facing as a new mom and also with COVID?
I'm so thankful. Like in my personal practice, I intentionally didn't take on work, so I kind of phased that down. And then my daughter was born about a week and a half before the school semester ended. So thankfully, I've had 3 months where I haven't had to worry about the back and forth. Kind of kept my eye on email to sort of see what's going on since so much has been changing. But I haven't had to go back and forth. And now kind of ramping up, trying to develop course content and my curriculum to be taught in a synchronous way. I'm starting to feel that pressure because I'm not on the clock yet, technically, but I need to start putting in time. My husband also in architecture, and the projects he's been working on has been cramming for deadlines lately. And so trying to, knowing how the projects are and knowing that you've got to push for a deadline, I'm really thankful. My parents are resources and they're here in town. They've sort of socially isolated, so we have a nice little pod. I don't know, it's almost on a daily basis. I don't know how single parents do it. I don't know how families do it that don't have other support networks. And it's so challenging right now. Like my daughter's pretty even keel. She's got a great personality and isn't fussy that often. But even in sort of daily care, to be able to kind of sit down and focus on an email, it's taking me significantly longer to really kind of knock out and be able to focus in a way that I didn't expect. I wasn't necessarily, I don't know how you can prepare for it, but I wasn't prepared for it. So I'm having to restructure my days a little bit differently, and have kind of running two lists. What are, the kind of, okay, what's the 15-minute task that I can sort of knock out in this window? And then when she goes to bed, like this evening, I can start to, do a bulk of the work. So I'm having to restructure my days differently. My husband and I are tag teaming differently, and thankfully, actually, I think similarly, he's in it. We can sort of share, and so working around project deadlines, but being able to kind of flex time and have that flexibility. And thankfully with his firm, he had posed before we started, Gould Evans, their sponsor, I can sort of name him, right? He had asked to be able to work from home through the summer, which they were supportive of, and then this hit, and it's been a blessing. I mean, the silver lining is that we've got an infant and we have had dedicated family time now for 3 months, and time together that we can all sort of enjoy one another and watch my daughter grow and be excited. So it's, I think really taking a look at the profession, and I hope coming out of this, we take the good of the kind of flexibility and the accommodation and the humanity and consideration that, kids are going to walk into the screen and dogs are going to be barking, and that we're all human outside of our kind of architecture lives, and bring that humanity kind of into the profession a little bit more. I think we'll all be better for it.
Yeah, agreed. That's a silver lining. I really like what you said, Ashley, about dad's rights. I think this is not just about women, it's about families. It's about family rights, human rights. It's about all of us. And the more that dads have, feel comfortable and have the space and the encouragement to be there for their kids and to take time off and have flexibility, the same that we want. And, that'll help everybody. That'll help us. That'll help the dads. That'll help the kids.
It totally evens the playing field.
Yeah.
And sort of, it takes that stigma away from women being, the expected providers. I think it's a hard stigma to overcome for a lot of institutions that are just, historically male. So they just never had to deal with it because their wives were the ones home all the time. So still are in a lot of cases. So
for sure.
It's definitely a part of the challenge of being a woman architect. And, whether you choose to have a family, it's frankly, I'll be honest, it was a lot harder than I thought it was when I made the decision to do it. It's been hard. Definitely have struggled mentally with, keeping that balance more than I ever thought I would. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for your honesty about that. Because it is hard.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It's very hard.
Yeah.
So, and kudos to Josh for fighting the good fight.
He does every day.
Yes.
He's beating down those stigmas. So
yes, that's great. Thanks for bringing that up. I that was a great point. Okay. Where were we here?
We were talking about the Pritzker Prize.
We were talking about the
Right.
Pritzker Prize.
Got totally sidetracked, and I
It was
apologize.
a great sidetrack. It's very timely and important. Okay, so the next question is, do you think this movie would have been different if it had been written and directed by a woman? Or would it matter? Does it matter? Was that something that came up for you? Oh yeah, I have to pick someone.
I'll go.
Okay.
So we watched this. We watched this with my parents, kind of in our weekly social
Mm-hmm.
hangout time. And although they've known me for years and they've known me as an architect and are sort of aware of architecture in a different way than they would, if I were in a different profession, they didn't. The stories were interesting, but they didn't know why or how impactful these women were to the profession. They had a feeling that this was kind of a documentary for architects by architects, and they wanted to know more about particular buildings or about particular planning and particular zoning and understand the impact of that or why that was so unique at the time. So we talked through quite a bit when the movie was over about, Corbu's, the housing building in Nice and how these floor plates start to alternate and the elevator goes on every other floor, but it meant that families could have exposure and cross ventilation, and there were a lot of questions that kind of came up. And I, thinking about it when you posed this question, I wonder if, even reflecting on how each of these women talked about their work and talked about the profession, if this had been made by a woman, would that narrative and that storyline been different? Would it have been portrayed in a different way, that it wasn't just that they survived and thrived in this dynamic despite these challenges, but would it have featured them sort of for their strengths in a different way?
Yeah, interesting questions. Kate, what do you think?
Well, I thought, for me, the tone of the movie was very much a documentary, and I think it purposefully was like joyful, and there was you could see that there's some purpose behind the way that the women are portrayed, and I feel like the filmmaker, to me, feels very Canadian, perhaps very French Canadian.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, for me, if it was directed by a woman, and particularly like maybe even like a woman architect, I think it would have been more editorial. Because there's a documentary film side, where they're trying to give you like paint the picture of what is, right, where they're trying to keep maybe an editorial voice out of it. But I do think that maybe it would have shown a little bit more about the struggles, about maybe what they had to go through to get where they were, what they've done, because I loved hearing their kind of origin stories, but I almost was like, oh wait, go back, I want to hear more about this thing. So it did cause me to ask more questions and to do a bit of research, and on these women who are incredible, that I'd not heard of and I'd not learned about in architecture school. And I really do wonder if it, especially if there's somebody that's had the similar experience as it is to what we experience, I do wonder if that voice would have come through, or if it would have just been about just the architecture, right? Because so many of us, it's nice to be a woman architect, but I'm an architect, first and foremost. And, please ask me about the project and what I'm doing, and not necessarily focus so much that, it's, obviously being a woman colors my perspective, but it's not the only thing about me. Right? So the work is what we're aiming towards. So yeah.
Ashley?
Kind of along the lines of what Kate said, I think the film would have been more conversational, and with less time spent looking at buildings. So that's one thing. It was like, you know, I think that's kind of what Kate was saying, is there was a lot of architecture in the film. It wasn't necessarily theirs, you know, it was like the city architecture. But, you know, I felt like there would have been maybe more dialogue, you know, if, you know, a woman was behind the camera and just talking. So.
Oh, Jim, if you could take Taz off of mute. There you go.
Sorry about that. I put myself on mute because the
And
phone.
then you can't get off.
I couldn't get off. It's like, unmute me. Stop silencing me. No, I'm just kidding. Great answers. Okay, so my next question is, how do you think that women contributions are remembered by history? I'll start with Kate this time.
Gosh, you know, it dawned on me a couple of years ago, trying to send architecture students to the library to look for, female architects. It's hard. It's difficult to find projects that are done by female-led teams or female-led studios, even currently, because as you know, we look backwards, so much, like, there's very few magazines or books written about us. I mean, there's more now that are contemporary, you know, like you think about, Jeannie Gang, or Zaha Hadid, or like Todd and Billy, or, but there's very few looking backwards. And even now in 2020, there's so little documentation about contributions of any of the minority architects, particularly, with somebody without a Western voice. So it's, I wonder, 100 years from now, if people are like, in retrospect, they know that we exist in the profession, but we're, just not represented. It's I don't know, it's really hard to see how history will look at this, other than, if it's going the way it's going, other than with, like, maybe complete disgust that we weren't more, represented more, because we're obviously here, we're obviously doing work. It's just not very well documented.
Why do you think that is? Maybe because,
there's not a lot of women, in the upper echelons of most of the firms. Didn't Big get criticized recently because they only have one female partner?
Which
and it's like,
firm did you say?
Bjarke Ingels Group.
Oh, Bjarke Ingels. Oh, okay.
Out of almost 10, maybe around 10. And they're thought of as a very inclusive, progressive firm. So it's, it's the issue of attrition, right, that we're facing, like with all the NCARB statistics and things like that, where so many of us graduate, but then it's something scary, like only 10% of women actually get licensed and continue forward into practice as an architect. So, and then the attrition gets worse as you try to get up into the upper echelons of, particularly large firms. And it's just, I don't know, it could be for all these things, the societal pressures and other things like that. I know that the profession has been particularly hard for some friends of mine, and then they've stepped away, just, getting comments made to them, going through experiences, and then they leave, and these are talented women, who go on to do, you know, turn their talents to other things and become, you know, recognized in other things. But it's, yeah, there just isn't the documentation to show a lot, to, you know, to show the breadth and the depth of like who we are as a profession.
Good point. Ashley Lake, how do you think that women are portrayed in history and will be portrayed in the future as architects?
Well, I definitely think that women are still considered pioneers in architecture. I also, my opinion on why women architects aren't as documented is that a lot of the means of documentation is based on ego. So, you know, a lot of the, you know, articles that get published, you have to seek out those, you know, so if, you know, you're a woman, like generally, I don't love to toot my own horn. I just don't care. I'm not going to necessarily go seek out, you know, getting published for a building I designed. So, you know, I would guess that a lot of other women architects kind of feel the same way. And that it's kind of like the squeaky wheel, you know. And, you know, sometimes like we're just too busy with other things to like venture out and, you know, demand recognition. You know, I mean, look at how long it took Denise Scott Brown to get recognized for the Pritzker. She wasn't like barking down a door demanding it, you know. And you know, it might just be related to egos, and, you know, as simple as that, or it might be deeper. I don't know.
That's an interesting point. We are too busy. What do you think, Bree?
I mean, I think you're right about ego. I think that does come into it. Is there an opportunity then, you know, with Denise Scott Brown, there was a group of students at Harvard that demanded this. We need change. This needs to be something different. And so how can we sort of, what are the opportunities to empower one another and to promote and advocate for one another? If we're not going to do it individually, or if it goes against someone's nature, it doesn't mean the work isn't worthwhile and isn't worth celebrating. Are you familiar with Parlour? Parlour. They're an organization out of Australia, but it's Women, Equity, and Architecture. And it's a group of women in the profession, and they have massive research databases where they are, they have like Wikipedia sit-ins where they will do research on female architects and women architects in their community and build up Wikipedia pages to help create this documentation, to create this history, and to make it available. And so how they're doing research and promoting diverse voices, even, you know, a whole variety of women from a whole variety of backgrounds. I think they're a great model to look at, and we can learn from them. And it might be that within the United States, there are groups of people that are trying to kind of celebrate the well-known architects, but there's an opportunity even locally, and with, you know, the women's leadership group that we have here, part of our mission is to kind of promote and to advocate for the diverse voices we have here in the Valley, and to start to celebrate that work and make it visible not only within architecture, but to the larger community. And so if we can do it for one another, is that the sort of workaround from the kind of ego fall off, or you know, the fact that many people are busy and are running multiple jobs, family, work, whatever, at the same time.
Sure. I think I just wanted to chime in here. You know, like a lot of times organizations will say, well, my organization and my events are open to everybody. It's not my fault and minorities or women aren't coming. So to really cultivate diversity, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of proactive work of like actively recruiting women, actively recruiting minorities. And it's not passive. It's not saying, well, my doors are open, walk right through, you're invited. It's like, well, no, because there's all these systemic barriers. You have to go out there and do outreach and really work towards it. So I think, you know, the organization that Bree is talking about, Parlour, I think we have to, and architecture firms and our organizations, we have to actively be promoting women and their work and recruiting women and retaining women. We have to be like, this has to be like a job for us. It's part of the job, until it is, I don't think we're ever going to get there, and we're not going to be remembered by history, because it's just like, well, we face all these systemic barriers. So without the work, we won't get there. So that's what I think. Okay, so do you think that much has changed? What has changed and what hasn't since these women went through their careers? I'll start with you, Bree.
What's changed is that the population is different.
Mm-hmm.
People coming in, being introduced to architecture as a profession, those pathways are starting earlier. The makeup within architecture schools across the country and around the world is much different. And so, being able to kind of start school and look around and have others that look like you or that are come from similar backgrounds or from completely different backgrounds, we're in a better place than we were. There's still the challenge of, how do we support and promote, as you just mentioned, like these systemic barriers, and that happens at the university level as well. It's not just about covering someone for tuition and they're being able to study school. You've got, for many, it's the cost of living, it's the cost of materials, the expenses associated with the profession and with the degree. We have students even at ASU that prioritize, it's either you build a model or you can make rent this week, or I put all of my money into printing my portfolio, but I can't afford appropriate clothes to be able to go to an interview. And there are, with these more diverse voices, people are coming into the profession with different challenges, with different backgrounds, and with different privileges. And so I think, while we still have the same challenges, and oftentimes I'm still one of the only women in a room, even though it's looking different at school, it doesn't always translate into practice, certainly not in construction either. How can we support these pathways, and how can we provide systems of support within the profession so that regardless of where someone is coming from and what they bring with them, they can succeed and thrive in the profession. And I think we're in a unique place now, and I think even with 2020, as crazy as it is, it's really starting to bring these challenges and differences to the forefront. And there are many design justice is now a part of the conversation, and it wasn't before. And we are still learning, and we are not getting it right. I think it's still really young, and others are doing it better. But I think to keep that in the forefront, for me, that's what's exciting about where our profession can go and sort of change from where it was.
For sure. Yeah, and I'm excited that you and Kate are educators, are, bringing in the next generation, and you guys, really aware of the issues, and I just, that gives me a lot of hope. Ashley, so what do you think is different? What has changed? What hasn't since that movie? Those people in the movie.
Well, I'm going back to one of Denise Scott Brown's quotes from the movie, where she was basically asked the same question, and she said there are seemingly different challenges today, but they're actually the same challenges repeating. Mm-hmm. And I'm at a point in my career where I'm starting to see that. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing the same questions come around, and like, well, I talked about that 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. So that was really interesting for me to just sort of see that point, recognize that I'm starting to get to that point where I'm seeing those challenges repeated. In some ways it's frustrating because you feel like you just continuously work and work and work to make change, and it's not happening. But the reality is, it's happening where you work on them. It's not happening systemically. So I think that's our biggest challenge. If we really want to keep some of these societal, mistakes or challenges from repeating, we need to work at that scale.
Yeah.
It's hard for us as individuals, but.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that we may not see the change in our surroundings per se, but it has a ripple effect. Like, I think that Denise Scott Brown being snubbed and all of the backlash has led the Pritzker people to at least be like, oh, we should reform and look at women as part of the, pool. And now
How
they're
novel.
how novel. Oh, yes. So I feel like, she was snubbed and suffered that defeat, but it happens in generations sometimes, or it happens like decades later or whatever. It's very discouraging, but I think you're right, What about you, Kate? What do you think is different and what is the same?
Well, personally, I thought it was fantastic that they're all still pretty much practicing in some way, because I feel like that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be like 94 years old. I'm going to still be like trying to go into the office every day, that kind of thing. So like it gives me hope personally, that, despite their struggles, they push through and, they're still making contributions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's changed, but I don't think it's changed that much, right? Like, there's still places like studios and firms and places where it's difficult to be a woman and to work there. And, whether the tone is, they may not realize it, that they're difficult for, it's half the population to work there because of the way that they, structure things or just some of the things that they're doing. But, yeah, like Bree said, and I'm sure Ashley has this too, where you're still the only woman in the room and you're just like, what year is this?
Yeah.
There's times when I'm the only woman in the room and I'm also the youngest person in the room. And it's just like, wow, okay, this is okay, interesting. Let's just go with it. Yeah, I don't think that much. I don't think that much has changed. I think that there are more women in offices, but I've worked at places where I'm the only woman, as an architect. And it does. And I don't know if it is something to do with society, the societal pressures that we face. But like Bree, I'm hopeful that, this pandemic has basically reduced us all to humans, kind of being on the same, on the same side and the same page, because like we're facing something that reduces us to, humans, right? Where it's like we're all as humans combating this thing that's, scary and out there. And I hope that as we start to emerge from this time, from the pandemic, that we remember the humanity and we remember that, people are having to be humans first and to care for their children and to care for their families. And, like everyone's looking at your space differently, your home space, the office that you just sort of like, oh yeah, I can work at the kitchen table, or oh yeah, I can work at, this little table like shoved in a corner somewhere. It's fine to check email and stuff like that. Like everyone's kind of looking at that like, yeah, maybe the kids shouldn't have their play space in the same area that I have my office. Like that does not make sense. I hope we emerge from this, hand in hand almost, and go, okay, we'll have to get through this humanity thing together. And, some of those old systems that were in place just aren't going to work anymore because, we've all had to come from this thing and we have to move forward. And those things that we did back there, well, hey, they're working okay now. So let's take that forward. So, and I do think it's a great time of reckoning for all of us, with, the Black Lives Matter, all these other things. Mm-hmm. And, again, like it's about humanity. And as architects, that's what we do. You know, we design basically containers, spaces for humanity, and you know, the context and the natural environment that we're, you know, given. So we're all about humanity. So it's strange to me that we don't reflect, you know, the humanity in which we serve.
And we
And
kind of
if-
put on a face and
Yeah.
pretend, you know, almost pretend that those things aren't important sometimes.
or they're separate,
Yeah.
right? Like we do, and sometimes in the language we use, we separate like the humanity. There's that joke that architects prefer to take pictures of spaces without the people
Without
in
people, yeah.
Drives you crazy.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, or you use somebody for scale, you know. um, so you know, I think that that's kind of in the past. At least I'm very hopeful that that kind of way of looking at things is in the past, and that we move forward because, I mean, this time is like very impactful, and it would be silly if we tried to reconstruct what happened before, after this whole event.
Yeah.
It would be a shame if we don't take advantage of this.
Exactly. Well, we have to remake things anyway. Why not remake them in a better image?
Right.
Yeah, this is a great opportunity to rethink. I appreciate you bringing up humanity, because I think that's really, like I thought in the movie, is very, you know, their work, each one of them was very, you know, aware of social justice, aware of their communities. I just thought their work was very humane. I was really inspired by that. So I think having more women in the field will make the field more humane. I mean, people can argue with me about this, but that's what I think. I wanted to read a comment that Beth Johansson made. I think maybe all of us know Beth, but she's a landscape architect. But she says, I personally found the fact that all these women were still working well into their senior years a source of inspiration as well. Yes, they are all women that are trailblazers because they are women, but they are elder women still participating in the improvement of the urban fabric. As we age, we are told by society that we have less value as women. Yet, we all know elders in our respective professions that are a constant source of inspiration. I was inspired by that too, Beth. I thought that was hugely inspiring, you know, especially as women, that you know, they were all still working. I'm like, dang, these ladies, like the landscape architect, Cornelia Oberlander, like marching up those stairs that she designed, you know, in her like 90s or whatever. And I'm like, impressive. And she's like yelling at the people working there, like, what are you doing? I love that. Yeah, she was amazing. Oh, they're all amazing. Okay, so we're coming up to 8:30 almost. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Which luckily this is my last question.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. It's totally okay.
They want some camera time. Every time I get on a Zoom call, this is what it's like.
Oh, they're welcome. We want to see them. We don't mind. Okay, my last question is, what advice do you have for women in architecture today, both emerging professionals and those of us who've been in the profession for a while now? I'll start with Ashley.
Well, I think, you know, a big piece of advice is to just be supportive of each other. Don't be afraid, you know, you don't have to be disrespectful, but don't be afraid to speak up when you see something that's not appropriate, or, you know, you see some kind of, you know, just imbalance in the workplace or in the profession, because that's how change is made. It's also, you know, I think important to note that, you know, some of the oppressive nature of places we've worked in our careers, not every place is like that. So it's important to not kind of blanket, and that you know, you can find a place that you can be accepted for who you are and not have to you know, feel unwelcome. So just kind of seek that out and make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who are supportive.
Yeah. Kate?
Well, first, you know, I like to tell them to trust themselves,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like, I mean, going through the education process of what we do, going through the apprenticeship process that we do, the internship, I mean, it's a hard slog for anyone in any circumstance. I feel like just, I mean, I took 7 exams, you know, like it's a lot. But trust yourself. I mean, if you have that feeling that, you know, since like for me, I always knew I wanted to be an architect. I was drawing floor plans from the age of 6. You know, like my parents didn't know what to do with me, and they were like, "Oh, there's this thing called this architect. Does that sound great?" And I was like, "Yes, that is awesome. I will do that thing." You know, just, you know, don't let that flame get extinguished by somebody else. If you have that innate kind of, you know, feeling inside of you, go for it. No is 2/3 of yes, right? So, you know, be tenacious, because people are going to tell you no all the time. People, you know, it's easier for them to say no than to help and to get invested and to get involved. And I mean, you can't always turn a no into a yes, but, you know, by trying, you'll learn something. And also, I really hope they destroy the myth of the Starchitect. So, because I truly believe that architecture is a team sport. It is wholly collaborative, and these people don't get to where they are by themselves. They have a team of people working for them. You know, they might be steering the ship and being the captain, but and they'll have usually a lot of practice under their belts, but they're having a lot of help and guidance as well from other people. So I really don't believe in Starchitect. And I, you know, focusing on the office that it came from.
Great point. Bree.
Kate, you and I think are on the same page. You know, in the same ilk as trusting yourself, that each of us has value. You know, we each have experiences that we bring to the table, and we've got memories and strengths and kind of dynamic stories that help make us better designers and better architects. And there's value in that. You know, we're designing spaces for an incredibly diverse group of people. We should be an incredibly diverse group of designers to be able to advocate in that way. So, you know, the trust that there's, you know, that the experience you bring offers a new perspective and offers a much needed perspective, because you then become an advocate for someone else with a similar background. And in the same token of you know, excusing the myth, this is such a dynamic profession, and it does involve so many different players and so many different skill sets and mindsets, that if you are really sort of business oriented, there are firms, you know, there are places for you to plug in. If you're a really strong designer, there are places for you to plug in. If you're excellent at detailing and thinking about things in 3 dimensions and focus on materiality, or you're looking at design justice, or you're looking at sustainability, there's a place for you within the profession. And so really recognizing how dynamic it is, and the diversity that's required to be able to kind of design and create and execute a space, there's room for all of us, and to kind of do your best to find a mentor that can help you succeed in a way that you can be dynamic and thrive in a way that you'd like.
Yeah, really great point. I really appreciate what all of you said. I think, yeah, you know, when I was going to school, I came out thinking, well, there's only one way to be an architect, or there's only one goal, which is to be a Starchitect, which is to be a design architect, or to be a very famous design architect that gets published in magazines, and, you know, it has accolades and design awards and all this stuff, you know, and I thought anything less than that is failure. And that education didn't see that, it didn't recognize that there are different strengths and people, and like Bria is saying, it's such a dynamic and wide profession. It's wide open.
Yeah.
And you can do what you, and you can fit where you fit. You should fit where you fit. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to be Herzog and de Meuron, even though they're like have the most accolades and all that stuff. So I really appreciate that. And I just wanted to say, I got a lot of inspiration out of you guys' conversation today. And I think, I hope that young women are watching this and seeing, like if you find a mentor like any one of these women on our panel today, how fantastic, like there are, it's a very hopeful thing. And I just want to, really thank our panelists that they brought a lot to the table today. They shared their personal struggles, because we're humans and our personal struggles are our professional struggles. It's all the same, we're all one human being. So I just really appreciate everybody today. And thanks for participating. We have like 5 minutes, so I don't want to like start the audience to ask questions, because I know we're going to go over, but if you have questions or you want to contact any of us, feel free. I'm sure, the panelists would be happy to field questions outside of this. So you can get a hold of Steve, and we'll let you guys get on with your almost weekend.
Can I ask a favor really quick? Does anyone mind turning off their camera so at least I can sort of see who all's been here? It would just be nice to kind of see everybody who's been listening.
I have just been unmuted. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. A wonderful talk. A wonderful talk.
It was. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all for being here.
Yes, thank you.
And thank Jim for putting all of the tech together.
Thank you, Jen.
Oh, you're welcome.
Bye,
It's very interesting.
Bye.
Anything else?
Thank you, Taz, for inviting me to the panel.
Oh, a
Yes,
group
thank
hug.
you very much.
A big group hug.
Yes, thank you, Todd.
Bye.
Thank you,
Amen.
Jim. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye.
Bye.